Thanks. Bless you. Hey there. How are you? That's Aurora. Nice to meet you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, looking forward to the conversation. Join us if you can.
Quite a few people
Oh,
that
good.
you're- yeah,
Oh, good.
Got a good house.
Yeah.
Let me check on the time just to make sure we have
Listen to a little bit of hot music.
I'm going to the senator right here.
Introduce our presidential candidate running for the Democratic office. Here he is. And just say a few brief remarks. In case you don't know, Beto is from El Paso, Texas.
Yeah!
He's from the southern binational multicultural borderlands. But here he is now from the borderlands to the heartland. And it's great to have him. And let me also say that he's got lots of experience in terms of 6 years in the city council in El Paso, and also 3 consecutive terms in Congress. And in terms of, basically a lot of us didn't hear a whole lot about him until this past Senate race, where he made a huge splash in a red state. And anyway, so a few things about him in terms of he's very inspirational, motivates people. He wants to bring us together, end the divide, emphasize what we have in common in terms of any party, no matter what your background. He's a very inclusive candidate, which is what I find very inspiring. And also, in terms of lots of reforms that he's definitely putting forward for us to think about. I have to also say, as a personal side, whoops, I was in the punk rock too.
Yeah!
And I want to watch a bit here? No, a little too far for that. But I was thinking about that. One of your bands that you liked was Minor Threat.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, Beto is not a minor threat, he's a major threat to the status quo of this country, no doubt about it. And yet, he doesn't have any anger. He talks like he wants to bring us together, and I think that's incredibly amazing. And also, he speaks fluent Spanish, which amazes me too. So I can go on and on, but I won't, because I know you want to hear from Beto. So, it's my great honor to introduce maybe the next president of the United States.
How's everybody doing? Good to see you. Dave, thank you for the introduction. Another tall guy with a punk rock past who likes to stand on things. Person after my own heart. Iowa Central Community College, thank you for hosting us and having us out. To each of the students, whether you are here for credit or because you're interested in hearing what I have to say, or more importantly, at least for me and my benefit, that you want to contribute to the conversation, share your ideas, offer a suggestion, provide a solution to something that you know challenges us and this country together right now. I am so glad that you came. And Fort Dodge, I just got to tell you, your willingness to contribute to our shared success, the headline that I just read at Casey's, where I resisted yet another slice of breakfast pizza, was about the people of this community shipping drywall to Hamburg, Iowa, a town ravaged by a flood caused not only by God, but by humankind, by our emissions, our excesses, our own inaction. The Missouri River Basin has seen 4 times the runoff of an average year. The greatest runoff that we've seen as long as we've been keeping records anywhere close to the Missouri River. And when those who are still waiting for Congress to act on disaster relief, especially those who have had the grain, the soybeans that they've kept in storage that cannot find markets as long as we're in trade wars, and have levied tariffs that have provoked reciprocal tariffs that make what we sell to the rest of the world no longer competitive, no longer profitable for those farmers. You, the people of this community, have stepped up to help your fellow Americans, to help your fellow Iowans. We saw this in Story County, where they were loading up on feed and hay bales and sending it across the border to Nebraska to help those farmers there at their moment of need. That is America at its best, and I guarantee you, not a single one of you asked those in Hamburg what party they belong to whom they pray, whom they love, how many generations they've been here in this country, or whether they just got here yesterday. All that mattered at that moment is that they're our fellow Americans and our fellow human beings, and we're going to treat them that way. You with me on this? So I'm honored to be in your presence, and I bring you greetings, saludos, from the U.S.-Mexico border, from El Paso, Texas, which with Ciudad Juarez forms the largest binational community in the hemisphere, in all of the Americas. Are you from El Paso as well? Right on. What high school? Isleta. Right on. That was our mortal enemy at El Paso High. Now we're friends. And it's a beautiful place, physically stunning, in a different way than this part of Iowa. Not as much green. We're in the Chihuahuan Desert. We're at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. Our base elevation is 4,000 feet. We're in this river valley formed by the Rio Grande, which brings, not divides, these two countries, these two people together. 3 million of us speaking English and Spanish with different cultures and histories, but come together to form one people. And it's powerful, and it is amazing, and it is so much that is right with this country right now. El Paso, Texas, one of, if not the safest cities in the United States of America, not despite the fact that we are a city of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees, but because we are a city of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees, those who are called to us, and think about this, if you haven't already done this in your life, leaving your hometown, your family, your culture, your customs, your language, to arrive a stranger in a strange land without a dime in your pocket, to get ahead for sure for yourself and for your kids, but also, let's face it and accept it and acknowledge it and embrace it. You are called to this country to contribute to our shared success and greatness, and you have. Earlier today in Storm Lake at Delicias Bakery, run by Diego. The entire conversation we had together was in Spanish. He talked about how he and his family were following the jobs and landed them at Tyson's and meat packing plants, providing the food on which so much of this country depends, on which so much of the world depends. But also investing their earnings in starting new businesses and revitalizing that community with their very presence, with the risk that they are willing to take on the behalf of others. Not just their families, not just those who speak their language or look like them, but everyone. You go back to the O'Rourke's. Whenever we arrived on these shores from Ireland, perhaps fleeing famine, with no other place on the planet that would take us in, and this country allowed us to contribute our part, to be successful, to ultimately land in El Paso, Texas. And as the son of Pat Francis O'Rourke, and the father to Ulysses Francis O'Rourke, UFO, but we had to keep that Francis going in each generation of O'Rourke's. I'm so grateful for this country that is a nation not based on race or ethnicity, but an idea and an experiment that the people of the planet could come together here, defined not by our differences, but by our common interests, the common ground literally upon which we stand, the common cause that we fight for, whether that was back in World War II or whether it's meeting the existential challenge of this moment. A planet that is warming, that will cause more flooding along the Missouri River, more flooding in Houston, Texas, in my hometown, more droughts through which our farmers and our ranchers and our producers and our growers persist, more wildfires claiming not just more property, but more lives, more wars as resources become more scarce. This country is going to have to pull together, Republicans and Democrats, big cities, small towns, all of us Americans, before we are anything else, to meet that challenge, the challenge of healthcare in a country where far too many, we count them in the millions, cannot see a doctor or afford their prescriptions that could keep them alive, are getting arrested on purpose for their schizophrenia their bipolar disorder, to go to the county jail, which has become one of the largest providers of mental health care in this country. Universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care is going to take all of us. It cannot be one person, and it cannot be one party. Economic opportunity in a country that has the greatest division of wealth and income in the lifetimes of anyone in this room, unless you're 140 years old, for the last Gilded Age, where you had a concentration of power and privilege that at that point was unprecedented. And it, back then, like it will today, provoked a progressive response. We needed to make sure that the working woman and the working man could use the leverage of the value that they provided to exact better working conditions, better wages for themselves, and yes, for everyone else. As Dee Taylor told me in Las Vegas a couple of weeks ago, one job should be enough. You work 40 hours, you put your life into the success of a larger organization, and you should be rewarded for being able to do that. Be able to pay the note on the mortgage for your house, be able to put food in front of your family, afford that copay for the flu medication that you need literally to stay alive. I don't think that is asking too much. We should invest in our school teachers and our educators, some of whom are working 2 and 3 jobs right now just to make ends meet, though they have the most important job in front of them. That child whose lifelong love of learning, once unlocked, will allow them to do anything they set their sights on, and by extension will allow this country to achieve anything that we want to. We need to make sure that you can afford to take care of yourself and your kids and your parents. Paid family leave for everyone in every single part of the country. And women in a state, like Iowa, that ranks 35th in the disparity between what men and women are paid for the same job that provides the same value. We must have equal pay for every single woman in this country. I also want to make sure that those who are providing for the success of this country are able to be guaranteed the protections they need to continue to work these jobs and provide so much value for the rest of us. After years, decades of diminishing the power of unions, it is time to strengthen them. I want to make sure that when you graduate from high school, you are college ready to come here, but you're also career ready to find a job that provides purpose and function and dignity and a real paycheck in your life. Those apprenticeships that more Americans can join if we make it a priority. Those apprenticeships that more older Americans can return to after they've raised their families, or after their job has been automated out of existence, or after they want to try something else in a new community. Those apprenticeships are a lifeline, not just for people, not just for families, but for entire parts of America, to allow people to work where they live, or to choose a new place to live if they want to. Those apprenticeships are a path towards function for those who return from the battlefield. 18 years and counting in Afghanistan, 27 years and counting in Iraq. Coming back from being as essential as you can be as a human being, what you do in that military unit will determine the fate and the fortune and the future of the other members and of yourself. When you come back to this community as a veteran, I want to make sure that not only do you have the care that you need from the VA, you don't wait in a line to receive it. Not only do you have a roof over your head and you're never begging for money on a street corner or a gas station. Not only can you use your post 9/11 GI Bill to come to this institution or any institution of higher learning, but you're connected with a trade or a profession that gives your life purpose again once you are back in your community. Let's make sure that every working American can work and lead a life of dignity. And every American in every rural community that produces the food and the fiber that we depend on, that the world depends on, which is helping us to meet our climate challenge goals by reducing our dependence on fossil fuels, that we allow them to make a profit on their farms. I don't think that is asking too much. The alternative is those farms are sold, they're aggregated into conglomerates of corporations, or they're subdivided into homes and blacktop. If we want to be able to pass them on to the next generation, let's free our farmers from the whims of a commodity market, allow them to add value to what they grow, do their part to combat climate change, incentivize them through the Farm Bill to plant cover crops, to use precision tilling and farming to capture more carbon out of the air and sequester it under the soil. Let's make sure that we partner with rural America, revive rural America by listening to rural America. Show up everywhere for everyone, because everyone counts and everyone matters. And if we do that, we will be able to meet each and every single one of these challenges. To Diego's question earlier today in Storm Lake, there are so many of us here who are working jobs, he said, that no one born in Storm Lake or in Iowa or in the United States, frankly, is willing to do. Adding value to these communities, to this economy, to our way of life. But people who are yet unable to contribute to their full capacity to the success of this country because they live in fear, they live in the shadows, they don't have citizenship and the ability to do everything they were intended to do in their lives and do it for us here in the United States. So, the ability to free more than 1 million dreamers from any fear of deportation by making them citizens here in our country, not doing it at the price of their parents, the original dreamers, or at the cost of a $30 billion, 30-foot high, 2,000-mile wall that, by the way, will not be built on the international boundary of the United States and Mexico. That's the center line of the Rio Grande River Channel. It will be built well into the interior of this country, on someone's farm, someone's ranch, someone's home, that we will have to seize through our power of eminent domain, taking their livelihood, their way of life at a time of record safety in communities like mine along the border of El Paso, Texas. You know full well who it is that we are apprehending right now. In all honesty, who's turning themselves in the parlance of the Border Patrol, who is arresting themselves? Kids. Kids, if they are lucky, with their moms. What would compel you to send your 12-year-old daughter on her own, maybe in the hands of a coyote or a smuggler, for a 2,000-mile journey? Some people satisfy themselves by saying those are bad people, bad parents. I'd never do that to my child. Well, you would if it were the only opportunity to keep her alive. To make that journey on foot, atop a train, not inside, known as the Beast or La Bestia, to show up here at our border, the border of a country comprised of refugees and asylum seekers and immigrants from the world over, who at their most vulnerable and desperate moment, we don't welcome them with open arms. We take that child, literally by force, if necessary, from the arms of that mother who is willing to risk her very life for that child. We send the mom back to the very country from which she fled in the first place. In some cases, the deadliest places on the planet today. We put that child in a cage, sent her to a foster care home, maybe in Michigan, maybe in Iowa, maybe God only knows where. And that child and that mother, still some of them today, no hope or prospect of seeing one another again. This is tantamount to torture. It is cruelty. It is inhumane, but it is up to us to decide if it is un-American, because in this democracy, where you are the government, and the government is you, for as long as these conditions persist, it is on all of us. The good news is, whether it's climate, whether it's immigration, whether it's following our own asylum laws, whether it's reviving rural America or making sure this economy works for everyone, we still have the chance to get it right. But it's going to take everything from all of us. We will not be able to meet it by half measure or with only half the country. That's why I'm running, to serve you as the next president of the United States of America. Because I want to make sure that we bring all of us into this democracy. The people of the future. In my case, Ulysses, his sister Molly, and their brother Henry, they are depending on the people of 2019 and 2020. We cannot be found wanting. We cannot disappoint them. We cannot risk their judgment and the accountability that will surely follow if we fail them at this moment. This one, no pressure, Iowa, is on us. But I believe in us. I believe in this country. I believe in every single one of us, and I know that we can make it happen. That's the way that we will continue to campaign, bringing people together, not just to secure the nomination, not just to defeat Donald Trump in November of 2020, but come January of 2021, bringing this entire country together, Republicans and Democrats alike, on our shared priorities to get after it and to get them done. Thank you for having us out here today. Looking forward to your questions and your comments and your suggestions.
Beto, what is your plan to revitalize our rural communities?
The question is, what is our plan to revitalize rural communities? We've been doing a lot of listening to rural communities, learning from rural communities, being inspired by the leadership that we see in rural communities. In another part of the state, east of where we are today, in West Burlington, Iowa, at an ethanol plant, where I mentioned adding value to what we grow, helping to free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels and greenhouse gas emissions, and most importantly, in that cooperatively owned factory that is providing high wage, high skill, high value jobs for more than 200 people, a reason for young people to come back or to stay in West Burlington in the first place. We begin to see a vision for a path out of the struggles that many in rural America are experiencing right now. I mentioned the Farm Bill affords us an extraordinary opportunity to open up technologies and markets to farmers to do more of their part to capture the carbon that is in the air now so that we can get to net zero emissions as soon as humanly possible, because the humans who will succeed us on the planet are absolutely depending on it right now. Investing in healthcare, as we see more clinics and hospitals in rural America closing down. Infrastructure like broadband internet. Try finishing your education, getting a job, getting your product to market, finding a date on Tinder if you cannot get online. It's absolutely crucial. And yet it's going to cost us something, an investment. Not pity, not sympathy, not a handout, but a partnership. Much the same way we did in 1937, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in the midst of the Great Depression, partnered with rural America, with the Rural Electrification Administration, those co-ops and communities around the country. They had to pony something up, they had to come together, but we met them halfway. When we show up for rural America, we listen to rural America, when we learn from them and follow their guidance and deliver for rural America is going to be there for all of us. And they already are right now. I mentioned the food and the fiber that we grow. Those service members who are in Afghanistan tonight, where it is tonight, in Iraq tonight, in Syria tonight, in Yemen tonight, in Libya tonight, in Somalia tonight, disproportionately come from rural communities. And they always have. And so let's acknowledge the debt owed to rural America, the opportunity to partner with rural America, the fact that rural America's success produces the success of this country and of so much of the rest of the world. Thank you for the question.
First of all, let's call it what it is. What's happening at the southern border is a genocide. It meets like, what, 6 of the 8 points of genocide. But my question is, I think Iowa is second only to Texas in wind production. Do you think wind causes cancer?
You know, somebody seeing the president's comments asked me about this a couple of nights ago. And I did not feel comfortable commenting because I was not sure that any person alive in 2019 would say something like that. And yet we did our due diligence, and of course the president said that. No, wind turbines do not cause cancer. And yes, 300 years after the Enlightenment, I still believe in science and the scientists. And 1 degree Celsius is what we have formed just since 1980 over pre-industrial revolution levels. 1 degree Celsius is all we have left within which to play before this train is completely off the tracks. People of the future, unable to live in communities that they call home today, Charleston, South Carolina, Houston, Texas, anywhere along the banks of the Missouri River. Southwest Texas will not be able to sustain human life going forward. You're worried about 400,000 apprehensions at the southern border. Wait until some countries in the Western Hemisphere can no longer support human life. You will then have a refugee crisis on your hands that you can only begin to imagine right now. So yes, wind, which is number 1 here in Iowa in terms of the country as a share of your portfolio of energy production. In Texas, we generate more wind in absolute terms than any other state. And Republican governors and Democratic members of the legislature invested in the infrastructure to carry that capacity that we were generating. At Roscoe High School, home to the Plow Boys and the Plow Girls, you can graduate at 18 years old with a high school diploma, with an associate's degree, and with an FAA remote pilot's license, so that you can fly the drones that perform the maintenance inspections on the wind turbines that we have there. High wage, high skill, high value jobs. A reminder that the two fastest growing jobs in America today are wind jobs and they are solar jobs. So yes, there will be some sacrifice. Let's be clear and wide-eyed about this. But let's also understand that there is a new economy. There's prosperity in that economy. There's opportunity for rural America, for urban America, for the communities that have borne the brunt of climate change and pollution thus far, to be first in line to take advantage of these jobs, these opportunities, and this economic growth. We must free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels and greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you for the question. We have a journalist among us, senior in high school, asking a really good question about engagement by young people and whether or not I have advice. And I've got to tell you, I'm better served following your advice. We are all better served following your advice. The youngest among us have always been the leaders at these critical defining moments in our history. I think back to World War II. Those who stormed the beaches at Normandy, willing to lose their lives, losing their lives in the process, 17, 18, 19-year-olds from Iowa, from Texas, from every state in the Union, sometimes from other countries, willing to serve in our armed forces because they believed in America so much. Those freedom riders, taking Greyhound buses, taking their lives into their own hands throughout the Deep South, for having the courage and the audacity to drink from the water fountain of their choice, use the bathroom of their choice, knowing that it would land them in the penitentiary, knowing that they would be humiliated in front of their fellow Americans, their fellow citizens, sitting at the lunch counter in Greensboro or in Rock Hill, South Carolina, marching across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Many of those young men and women lost their lives, were willing to sacrifice their lives to purchase civil rights and freedom for all of our lives. And so these issues today, whether it's gun violence that claims more than 30,000 lives in this country every year, unlike any other developed country on this planet, it is young people who are forcing to change climate change. It is young people who are forcing us to accept our responsibilities at a moment that we still can. Healthcare for all. It is young people leading the charge. And in Texas, the transformation that we just saw in our democracy and in our politics, where we came within 2.6 percentage points of defeating Ted Cruz, but more importantly, 2 new members of Congress, both Democrats, who now sit in seats long held by Republicans, 17 African American women who won elections to judicial positions of power in Houston, Texas. That was led by young people. 500% voter turnout. And we're going to follow your lead. And I absolutely accept and I'm grateful for the fact that you're the leader right now of this moment, not of tomorrow. So we're going to be in this together. Thank you for being here. Appreciate
Back
it.
of the room, 1 o'clock.
I have a digital watch, Connell, so it's hard for me.
How will you help Main Street America for small towns like my own, 800 people, and businesses closing down, and now all we have is a city hall and a post office? How will you help like small businesses to grow in these towns that are Main Street America?
Thank you for the question. You know, I mentioned this unprecedented concentration of power and wealth and privilege, unseen since the last Gilded Age. And I talked about the progressive response, part of which was breaking up the trusts and the monopolies, returning more power to people, emboldening and strengthening unions so that they could use their leverage to exact better working conditions and wages for more Americans. We fast forwarded to the generation of FDR and the public works programs, the conservation Corps, the Rural Electrification Administration, investing in people, investing in communities, and ensuring that corporations and trusts and monopolies did not become too powerful. And when they had, breaking up that power. I think this moment calls for similarly bold measures. At a time that you've seen a concentration in corporate power, perhaps the best display of their capture and corruption of our institutions was 2 years ago, a $2 trillion tax bill. At a time that they're sitting on record profits, took their tax rate from 35% to 21%. The majority of those benefits flowed to corporations and to the already wealthy in this country. Those people of the future to whom I keep referring, they will not be able to believe it. At a time that you were $21 trillion in debt, when you had $4 trillion in outstanding infrastructure needs, when millions of Americans could not get health care, your answer to that was a tax cut to the wealthiest and to corporations. And in the same time that we've seen corporate consolidation, we've seen a reduction in dynamism in small businesses. Let me give you a statistic. Almost half of returning GIs from World War II started a small business. Car repair shop, grocery, restaurant, whatever it was, they came back and found opportunity in this country. The post 9/11 GI Bill beneficiaries, some perhaps in this room, those returning from the wars of 9/11, 4% of them have started a small business, have been able to build wealth and opportunity for others in their community, including other veterans. So breaking up the power of corporations, one of the ways that we do it is we don't accept a single dime of political action committee money, no corporate help, and no lobbyist support. We should make sure that we overturn Citizens United, which equated corporations with people and money and allowed corporations to have this kind of stranglehold on our democracy and on our economy. More access to capital, especially for communities whose independent banks have closed up or have been consolidated or consumed in larger financial institutions, and especially for communities that have been denied capital historically. If you think about Black America and the Jim Crow laws and the effects of segregation and redlining that prevented some from being able to get a home loan in the first place, it's one of the best ways to build wealth and pass it on in the United States of America, to produce a seed capital for that small business that you want to start. We've got to make sure that that access to capital gets out to all communities, especially those who've been functionally denied them before. So if we break up extraordinary power where it is, return more opportunity to those among us, invest in things like healthcare so that you're well enough and free enough to start that small business and focus on what you do best, and I think we're going to be able to meet this challenge as much as we did in the last Gilded Age. Thank you for the question.
Okay, straight down the middle.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Of course.
Immigration is personal to me. And our Republican congressman in my district, 4th district,
Oh my God.
goes around in his town halls and he sells the cages that the children are being held in as they're not in cages. And I know you were just at the border, under the bridge, where they were holding families, babies. And I just want America to hear and listen what's actually going on around here.
Thank you. It's a really important question. It's one that I've been thinking about for a very long time, and it's not easy to answer because if you just look at the facts, immigrants are less likely to commit violent crimes than Americans who are born in this country. It's just a fact. If you look at the facts, those communities closest to the border that are comprised of immigrants, El Paso, Texas, 85% Mexican American. A quarter of those who live in my hometown were born somewhere else. And yet we're one of the safest cities, and we've been either the first, second, or third safest city 20 years running. And we're not an outlier or an anomaly. You look at McAllen, Texas, you look at San Diego, Texas, on either side of the 2,000-mile border, and you'll find very similar conditions. I mentioned those that we're apprehending right now, by and large, are families at their most desperate moment, trying to follow our asylum laws, but not allowed to set foot in the United States per our laws at our international ports of entry, pushing them between the ports of entry where they're then arrested, and they're detained, and they're caged, and they're deported. Not something that we can be proud of now, and certainly not something our kids are going to be proud of when they read about this in the history books. You all have heard of the story of the St. Louis. Set sail from Hamburg, Germany, 1939. More than 900 Jewish refugees, little kids, women, men, tried to disembark in Cuba. Cuba, as they were crossing the Atlantic, changed its asylum laws so that they could not. Tried to come to the United States, not under the presidency of somebody like Donald Trump, in the presidency of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Someone we are so proud of for so many different reasons, some of which we highlighted earlier. But Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that administration, that America of that time, sent that ship back to Europe. And hundreds of those passengers were consumed, were killed, were murdered in the Holocaust. Children, women, and men. We look back on that moment and on that chapter with shame, as we should. Think about the people of the future looking back on this chapter. You know that wall that I talked about? Not only is it going to cost you $30 billion, not only are you going to take someone's farm in order to build it, not only are we as safe as we've been on the border, in other words, there's no cause to do it, but more than 10,000 people have died just in the last 15 years trying to cross into the United States. Women, children, and men. They're not in cages, they're not detained, they're not separated, they are dead. And as we build these walls, we've got 600 miles of them so far, we push them into ever more inhospitable, remote stretches of the desert where they are bound to suffer and in far too many cases die. So I want to make sure that we share the facts. You're spending $19.5 billion a year to secure the border. 20,000 Border Patrol agents. This is the high water mark for security spending and law enforcement on the border. The President sent 5,500 members of the United States military. As though we weren't in enough wars around the world, we're now going to deploy service members to the border, to some of the safest communities. But these facts and those statistics obviously are not compelling enough. So let's tell our stories. You may or may not know the story of Marcelino Serna. Undocumented immigrant, we might call him a dreamer today. More than 100 years ago, when this country entered the First World War, he joined the United States Army. His drill sergeant said, "Serna, you do not have to fight this. Every member of this unit's going to France, but not every man will come home." And Serna, like any good American, though he didn't have citizenship, though he didn't have status, said, "No, this is my fight, this is our fight." Came back from France, the most highly decorated veteran from Texas in all of World War I. Ambrosio Guillen, in East Texas, a dreamer. When Houston flooded, those 58 inches of rain and people were dying and drowning, like any good Texan or American, hitched his boat to his truck, drove down to Houston, put in where he could, saved lives, and in the process lost his life. Those are the immigrants, those are the dreamers, those are many of the undocumented in our communities. Let us tell their stories, because when the president calls immigrants rapists and criminals, tries to ban all Muslims as though they are inherently dangerous to our country, calls Klansmen and Nazis very fine people, calls asylum seekers an infestation. Imagine a president of the United States of America describing human beings who are desperate as an infestation. Then the cages and the deaths and the rise in hate crimes that we see in this country are predictable, and they have followed. So I want to make sure that we tell our stories. Powerful, compelling, true, and honest, and profound. It's not just the facts and the truth, as important as they are. It's the stories that we tell one another and the way that we connect that allows us to get to the policies that we desire, including comprehensive immigration reform. Thank you for the question.
Okay, straight back, and I know there's tons of them, I'm sorry guys, we only have time for a few more.
Yeah, you want to open up the border. Okay, how many people will we have here in the next 10 years? 1 billion? Are we ready for that? If you open up that border like the Field of Dreams, they will come from all over the world. There's billions in poverty. They will all come to the U.S. Do we have the means to just let them walk in?
Thank you for the question. I do not want open borders. I don't want anybody to just be able to walk in. I'd love this country to follow its own laws. We have asylum laws on the books that this administration is not following, not allowing people to lawfully attempt to claim asylum. And as you probably know, claiming asylum does not give you asylum or a permanent presence in the United States. If you meet the credible fear test, if you're able to meet some of the other barriers, you're able to stay. If you don't, you're deported back to your country of origin. 400,000 apprehensions last year. It's a big number, but it pales in comparison to the 1.6 million apprehensions in the second year of the George W. Bush administration. There are more Mexicans going south from the United States than are coming north from Mexico right now. We don't have zero migration from Mexico. We have less than zero migration from Mexico right now. So here's my solution to the very legitimate question that you posed. Yes, we've got to have security. I've worked on security with Republican colleagues, investing in our ports of entry, where the vast majority of everyone and everything that ever comes into this country first crosses. Knowing who they are and what they bring demonstrably makes us safer. I'm for comprehensive immigration reform. Having people come out of the shadows, get right and register with their government, that makes us safer. We now know who is in our communities. And then this, we can either meet those Central Americans at our front door, as we have been doing in this administration and in the last, with open arms or with a wall, or we can go to Central America and try to address the root cause of their outmigration and this flow of refugees, investing in those countries at a time that the president wants to zero out $500 million in aid for those three countries. We need something akin to a Marshall Plan that allows them to rebuild their civil society, their institutions, their rule of law, so that they can stay at home and rebuild their economy. If we fail to do that, then we should expect them to continue to come to this country. And I guarantee you, they will. No wall, no militarization, no inhumane policies will keep them out. This current administration is case in point to that. So let's be smart about how we meet this challenge. Thank you, sir.
And again, I apologize. These are my last two questions right here.
How can you help us improve our schools?
Thank you for the question. How do we improve public education so that it's truly a world-class experience for every child of any age, from any background, in any part of the country? First, let's acknowledge that starting in kindergarten at 5 years old is too late. Some kids on the first day of kindergarten at 5 years old are 10 months back in reading comprehension, 12 months back in math. And as you probably know from your time in school, I remember from mine, you never get to press pause and catch up to everyone else. You will more likely than not stay behind for the rest of your academic career. You are less likely to graduate from high school, be able to attend an institution of higher learning, earn something that makes it livable to live, to be in this country. So if we start universally at pre-K at 4 years old for every child, move that starting line back so everyone has a closer opportunity or a better opportunity at success in their lives, not only will those kids and their families do better, we will reap the benefit in this country from a more educated workforce that is earning more and contributing more and sharing more of the burden that will otherwise rest on fewer shoulders. Let's pay teachers and educators a living wage. They shouldn't be working 2 or 3 jobs. I want them only working 1 job. Let's relieve them of the pressure of teaching to a high-stakes, high-pressure, standardized test. I was sharing yesterday that we named our oldest Ulysses because we didn't have the guts to name him Odysseus, because the Odyssey, reading that, made such an impact on me. And when I hear about high schools that are teaching the abridged version now, because they have to set aside so many days and weeks for standardized test prep, it seems like we've got our priorities upside down. Let's allow teachers, educators, to answer that calling, to do what they are supposed to do in that classroom. They want accountability. They want to do better. I haven't met a teacher who doesn't, but that shouldn't be subject to a standardized test. It should be subject to others coming into that classroom, evaluating their performance, giving them ideas to do better, investing in their continuing education. These are some of the ways, in addition to common sense, gun safety reform, universal background checks, banning the sales of military weapons in our communities, to keep those teachers and those kids safe in their classroom. That's the only way that I could ask you or my sons, my daughter, to enter the profession of public education. I knew you were going to be able to do everything you want to do in your life and connect with those kids. So these are some of the investments we can make. These are some of the policies that we can change to expect better outcomes for everybody. Thanks for asking the question.
This is our last question.
I've got a statement and a question. Okay?
Sure.
I read, I guess, 20 years ago that they said that if the climate change doesn't be corrected, the desert will extend somewhere up between San Antonio and Austin. And I wondered if have you seen that?
We were just talking about this with Bill last night. There's this amazing article that I read last year. It was the moment, the year we lost Earth. Anybody know what do I have it directionally correct? Anyhow, look it up. It's amazing. And it talks about the generation that you just referred to. You know, by the 1950s, we knew that our emissions, greenhouse gases, were warming this planet. By the 1980s, there was a bipartisan political consensus that we had to do something about it. And the momentum was so great that oil and gas companies were trying to get a seat at the table because they knew that they were going to have to pay a price and they were going to try to mitigate the cost to them. But somewhere along the way, our political will broke, our ability to come together faltered, and we dropped it. And we dropped it for a generation. We ensured that the devastation that we're seeing right now would happen, and it would become much worse going forward. This planet, if we stopped emitting greenhouse gases right there, when I snap my fingers, will continue to warm because of the trajectory and the inertia that's already in the system. Right now, it is only a matter of degrees in terms of how bad it's going to be, how far up that desert will creep. The young farmer who came into one of our town halls in Texas, and she said, I'm here despite the fact that I'm a Republican, despite the fact that my son has a basketball game that we're missing, because she told me what my grandparents planted and grew, what my parents planted and grew, what I'm planting on this farm no longer grows. Climate change is here, not something that I've got to be prepared for. So it's on us now. Let us remind ourselves that the disasters we're seeing are not natural, they are in part man-made. And they're going to become much worse going forward. So yes, we've got to do everything we can within our power.
Okay, last question. Can you still get the best Mexican food on Lee Trevino Boulevard?
You are familiar with El Paso, absolutely. And you know, the rule of thumb in El Paso at your work table was to never eat Mexican food outside of El Paso. But I got to tell you, I have been very pleasantly surprised in Iowa. I mentioned that I was at Felicia's Bakery in Storm Lake today by the quality of food that I find in your communities. But yes, come back to El Paso for the real thing. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thank you all for having us out. Very, very grateful. Appreciate it.